Welcome to The Real News. We're continuing our discussion with Ben Norton. He's a reporter for Alternet's Grayzone project. So Ben, on the issue of leaks specifically, we talked to a former intelligence officer, and he said he was shocked Flynn didn't know that a phone call with the Russian ambassador on an open line would be recorded. What's your response to that? Like, what does that show us about sort of the carelessness of people in this administration?
I mean, I think it says it all, right? Flynn was always, he was known in the intelligence community for having his own, kind of intelligence, if you will. I mean, they disparagingly, spoke of his penchant for conspiracy theories. He clearly did not, understand protocol very well. So, I mean, there's certainly a degree of incompetence there. And when you look at the Trump administration, there's certainly no dearth of incompetence. But at the same time, I don't think we should necessarily maybe hyper-focus on that. It is certainly an important issue we should be looking at. But it reminds me of how many people on the left would just endlessly make fun of George Bush and his administration. Bush said many, stupid things. He was incredibly ignorant, but he also did a lot of damage. And we shouldn't let people's incompetence, delude us into thinking that they can't cause a lot of harm.
And I wanted to quote The Guardian here, talking about Keith Kellogg, who is the temporary replacement to Mike Flynn. Kellogg, this is from The Guardian, came to national prominence when he served as chief operating officer for Baghdad's provisional government through 2004. This is after the Iraq invasion. A year of mistakes. 2004 was a year of mistakes by the transitional administration that haunted Iraq through the next decade of war. And later, he went on to work for defense contractors. We know he's only a temporary replacement, but how do you respond to that?
When you look at the trio that it's being considered right now, we're in a situation that's, kind of like meet the new boss, same as the old boss, right? Flynn was, I would say, in some ways uniquely extreme, especially when it came to his virulent hatred of Islam and Muslims. But he was also a hawk, right? And then the other three people who are being considered are also hawks. So Keith Kellogg is, he's a lieutenant general. He's in many ways, kind of in the same vein as people like James Mattis, these kinds of, more traditional hawks. Like, they're anti-Russia, they're also anti-Iran. They're maybe more similar to the neoconservative wing. And if you look at the other two choices, I mean, they're actually pretty similar as well. In fact, one of the most egregious choices they're even considering right now is David Petraeus, the disgraced former CIA director who was enmeshed in scandal because he leaked classified intelligence to his biographer, who happened to also be his mistress. Although the Obama White House after that was continuing counsel with him anyway. But this is pretty ironic. Petraeus is also this kind of neoconservative figure. He endorsed Clinton for president. He himself, like Kellogg, he oversaw U.S. so-called counterterrorism and counterinsurgency operations, counterinsurgency rather. Petraeus is known for overseeing death squads and the use of torture in Iraq, and he played a big role in the military surge, and he called for, quote, unleashing America's air power in Afghanistan. So. In many ways, these three people, and then the last who's being considered, who's actually the front runner, is Robert Harward, and he, like Kellogg and Petraeus, again, they're pretty similar. They're kind of run-of-the-mill military hawks. Harward was deputy commander of CENTCOM under Mattis, and Mattis is now the defense secretary. He's known affectionately by the nickname Mad Dog Mattis. So these people are seen as like military moderates, right? They're not necessarily the kind of virulent, with, foam at their mouths kind of hawks like someone like Flynn. But at the same time, they're certainly no doves. They're certainly pro-war. They're certainly militaristic. And at the end of the day, we might see a shift on countries like Russia and maybe a few other issues, but I don't think there will be an enormous difference from what Flynn was doing.
And back to the issue of the leaks, because it's sort of been unprecedented how many leaks have been coming out. The New York Times and the Washington Post especially have documented the numerous people that are, numerous officials in the administration who are confused. Remember, there was one line about how they couldn't figure out how to turn on the lights in the Oval Office. They were sitting in the dark trying to do memos. Trump seems to be, ruling through ego. He doesn't want to, make complicated decisions. He has to seem like he's in control. The backlash that has come out of that, it's led to the resignation of Flynn, for example. But what are your thoughts on how this could, continue in the coming weeks and months, and what efforts Trump could do to clamp down on these leaks? We already know Obama, took unprecedented efforts against whistleblowers and leakers in his administration. So Trump would be following this precedent set by Obama.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very clear that internally, the Trump administration is incredibly opposed to transparency, not only externally. I mean, it's very clear the FBI has stopped taking email FOIA requests. I mean, and this is just the beginning of the administration. The Obama administration claimed falsely to be the most transparent administration in history. It was very untransparent. The Trump administration is not even, making such false pretenses. They do not in any way claim to be transparent. And internally, we see the same thing. Trump is incredibly concerned about any kinds of leaks. In fact, the Washington Post has described how internally people inside his administration don't really understand what's going on sometimes. I mean, he just keeps writing executive orders, or rather Bannon and his other aides keep writing executive orders, and he signs them largely without a lot of input from his administration. So this is a very top-down, strategy, and there's not much discussion of what will be going on. And the Washington Post reported on how, because people don't really know what's going on, they're trying to communicate with each other internally and ask each other what's happening, but they're also afraid of, Trump and other people in the administration finding out that they're discussing these issues. So even people who are Trump's allies and are working with him are afraid of stepping on any toes, are afraid of, being caught and accused of, leaking or spying or whatever. So there's clearly this very intense draconian atmosphere, and it echoes, of course, what's happening externally. Trump makes decisions from the top down. He and his close advisors, and Bannon. Again, I mean, when we're talking about Trump, we should always be talking about Steve Bannon, his chief strategist, who's his right-hand man in the Oval Office. Whenever he signs an executive order, you look at photos and Bannon is standing right next to him. Bannon is a very extreme figure. He's far right. As I mentioned earlier, he has a clash of civilizations worldview. In fact, a recent article in the Huffington Post by a kind of secular activist who organized an event featuring cartoons of Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. Even he said that Bannon is way too anti-Islam for him, and he said he recalled having a conversation with Bannon in which Bannon said that we're at war with Islam, and this is the man who is really helping to guide a lot of Trump's decisions. And the two of them, and maybe a handful of other people are making a lot of these decisions in the dark, proverbially and literally. And as you mentioned, with the story of them being unable to turn on the lights. And I think that really is metaphorical for how untransparent the entire administration is already.